Hello and welcome. I'm Darian Shirazi. I'm excited to have a conversation with Trisha Kothari from Unit 21 about how low-code, no-code tools are getting into the financial technology industry and really changing the landscape for a lot of different platforms. I'm currently a general partner at Gradient Ventures, which is a seed and Series A fund that's funded exclusively by Google. We invest purely for financial return, but we've made a lot of investments in low-code and no-code, including companies like Trisha's company. So without further ado, I'd love to have Trisha introduce herself, talk a little bit about Unit 21 and how she founded the company, and then we can go from there.
Thank you, Darren, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm Trisha Kothari, one of the founders as well as the CEO of Unit 21. Unit 21 is a suite of no-code tools for risk and compliance operations teams within financial institutions and fintechs. We work with banks, brokerages, payment companies like Chime, Intuit, Coinbase, Twitter, to help them identify potential fraud and money laundering by providing their risk and compliance operations teams with a set of no-code tools through which they can easily deploy statistical models to find anomalous activity.
Yeah, I remember when I first met you, you gave me a very extensive demo of the product, and it's actually pretty incredible the level of complexity that's required to identify difficult activity. Can you really, sort of talk about whether this was something that you set out to build as a low-code, no-code tool, or did you sort of say, hey, there are all these rules and different customizations that need to be made to identify fraudulent activity across financial products? Or did you sort of say, this is a low-code, no-code tool from the beginning?
No, we didn't really think of, we're going to go out and build a no-code tool. The way that this really originated was I previously worked at an online lending company called Affirm. And I was leading risk and identity from a product perspective at Affirm. And so we often had risk and compliance operations teams that wanted certain rule sets or certain workflows that were very specific and constantly changing because fraud and money laundering is constantly changing. The fraudsters are not staying stagnant. And because of that, we constantly had to go into the engineering roadmap and add new items. This led to a lot of tension between the operations team and the engineering team because the operations team was reliant on the engineering team to be able to do their job. And the engineering team simply did not have the bandwidth to be able to do everything. And that is really what originated this idea that there is a lot of pain within the operations teams to really control their workflows, control what kind of statistical models they're deploying from a fraud or AML perspective. And enabling them to do that is actually a really significant lift because today the way that they do that is they go to their engineering teams and then try to get into the roadmap, or B, they purchase standard off-the-shelf vendors where they have to customize the software so significantly that they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in professional services hours to really customize the software to their needs.
Yeah, actually, can you give an example of what nefarious activity would be? Like, what are some of the heuristics, and then also what are some of the more machine learning models that you've employed? Because it sounds like it's a combination of those two. Maybe a couple examples of these edge cases for the audience so they understand how detailed this gets.
Yeah, definitely. So the way that the company started is when it was just my co-founder and I, we were thinking about this idea of enabling non-technical risk and compliance operators to easily create their own sets of statistical models and rules to identify potential suspicious activity. And what we did is we reached out, we were really trying to validate the idea. So we reached out to 300 people or so on LinkedIn with anti-money laundering on their title. And one of them was incidentally the head of anti-money laundering at eBay. We ended up doing the demonstration at eBay, and they got really excited about the product. And they were seriously considering us. At the time, we had no company, no real product, customers, funding, anything. But they were seriously considering us for potentially using us for their anti-money laundering and fraud needs. So we went back to eBay and we said, why are you interested in us? We're a two-person company. We have nothing. We have no funding. We have no customers, anything at all. And the options that you're looking at are multi-billion-dollar companies. And eBay's response was that for all the other vendors, they'll come to us and they'll say, if you want to, let's say, do transaction monitoring to find suspicious activity in your transactions, they'll have a very standard schema of what a transaction is. So transaction will have an ID, an amount, a date, a status, etc. What we said is transaction can be anything that you want it to be. So for eBay, you may have a data variable like auction item type. And if the auction item type is, let's say, a couch, and the standard couch goes for, let's say, $800, and the auction item is going for $1,000, then that would not be anomalous. But if the auction item type is let's say, a Pokemon card, and the standard Pokemon card goes for $10, then $1,000 would be anomalous. And what we did is enabled non-technical operators, people who do not have a computer science education, people who have been historically gated by engineering, to be able to write complex statistical models that have only really been limited to their engineering counterparts. And by doing this, we've seen really significant value add to our customers. Our customers have been able to reduce fraud by 50%, false positives by 65%, so they can actually bring in more users and more transactions. And the reason for this is really in enabling that non-technical operator with no code tools, without them having to know how to write code. They can really deploy complex programs and complex statistical models.
Fantastic. I mean, conceptually, low-code, no-code is exactly what you said, which is allowing someone that has no data science or computer science experience to really have the power at their fingertips of what programming would give them. And so maybe, do you now talk about this concept a lot with your customers? Like, hey, we are a low-code, no-code tool, and we allow you to do all the things you could do if you were an engineer in KYC, AML. Is that sort of the pitch today to a lot of these customers?
Absolutely, that's the pitch today. And it's really interesting because no code, while I think that everyone talks about it all the time, a lot of different fields, it's completely, people don't know what no code means. And so when we go to our customers and we ask them, do you know what no code means? And they'll say, not really, what do you mean by that? And when we do a demonstration and show that, let's say, one of the features of our product, which people really love, is the ability to write a statistical model and test it over historical data, and do it in a very easy to use no code fashion. This would typically need a data scientist to write some Python scripts and then pull in data. And now someone who does not have a computer science education can do that. And then we really demonstrate our product and show that this is what no code means. And people love that because these operators, and who are very strong business users, but they're fundamentally non-technical, they have always been gated by what an engineer can do or what a technical person can do. And empowering the operator is something that they absolutely love, because ultimately they are the ones who are going to get promoted or fired if they do a good or bad job.
Actually, that's a really interesting point, I think, is that when I was selling into enterprises, there was always this fear amongst middle management or even executive teams, whether it was usually at banks or insurance companies that have been around for more than 100 years. There was this belief that if they embraced technology, that would lead them to disrupt themselves out of a job. And I sort of feel as though the low-code, no-code movement has instead harnessed the expertise of these individuals with the experience that they have. Let's say they have 25 years of credit risk and fraud knowledge, and being able to leverage a tool like Unit 21 to put what they have in their mind into a more efficient practice so they can scale their expertise. Is that sort of how you feel about this situation? I mean, I feel like it's now a symbiotic relationship between low-code, no-code tools and people that were afraid of technology that have maybe been in industry for decades.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. With respect to no-code tools and the automation around no-code, people are often worried that what if this makes me lose my job? But what we're seeing is that the average operator, the average fraud operations person or average compliance operations person can upskill themselves. So they're not doing paper pushing work. They're not just looking at 10,000 random alerts by a rules engine, which they're just flagging as false positives, but they're doing creative work. They're trying to find potential fraud rings. They're trying to find potential anomalous activity, and they're constantly using our statistical modeling engine to be able to flag any kind of suspicious activity.
Yeah, and then as there are more and more people that are using the internet and financial technologies, they're going to need to use some level of tools to scale that process, which is something that it sounds like you're enabling people to do. Maybe we can unpack a little bit about what these companies did before Unit 21. Did they probably hired a systems integrator like an Accenture or a Deloitte to build these tools, and it was probably a lot of custom scripts and tooling. And then I'll have a separate question, but I kind of want to unpack how that change to Unit 21, has that unlocked new opportunities for underbanked people or underserved people that maybe were sort of eliminated because they were maybe a fraud risk, but now because the tools are more advanced, they can get access to products that they wouldn't have before. But maybe talk a little about what they did before and how that's evolved.
That's a really great question. So first, fraud and money laundering, they're not new topics. Fraud has existed as long as money has existed, and banks have had to comply with anti-money laundering regulation to identify potential money laundering on their platforms since 1970. What these companies often did is really, they typically purchased vendors, legacy vendors, and these vendors then worked with the PwCs, Accentures, Deloittes of the world, poured hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars into customizing the software for their needs. And if they wanted to modify something, so let's say if eBay wanted to say, okay, I don't want to look at Pokemon cards, but I actually want to look at baseball cards, they would need to go back to the vendor to just make that simple change instead of being able to just do it on their own and then test things. In response to that, when the fintech movement was really starting about in 2012 to 14, a lot of companies, including my previous employer, had a very build internally mentality because they were so burned by the standard professional services hours that were being billed by legacy software providers that they said that, okay, if I really want to customize something to my needs, I should just build it. And ultimately, that led to a huge burn of engineering resources, which was spent on building risk and compliance operations tooling instead of the core product development. And what we found is that now by fintech companies using us, instead of hiring a team of, let's say, 10 engineers who are constantly focused on identity, risk, compliance, fraud, they can really use those 10 engineers to continue to work on their product and enable themselves to grow faster. And that's really the major unlocking capability, is that now fintech infrastructure companies like 21 really are part of this entire fintech movement. And this ecosystem is really symbiotic because by companies using Unit 21, of course, it's enabling us to grow, but we're also enabling them to grow because now they can just do more and they can enable themselves to add more users and add more product lines and really find new ways to accelerate the fintech revolution.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that's the noble part of this, is that not only are you enabling people internally at financial institutions to leverage low code, no code to do a better job of what they do, but also unlocking opportunities for maybe the users of these financial products that aren't committing fraud, that maybe have been eliminated from the system because the products and services available to the risk managers or the credit underwriters was very limited in nature. I think one of the other use cases I wanted to touch on is how some of your customers are actually social networks and what you're doing there for validation of individuals on social networks. I think, the verified badge on some social networks actually flows through Unit 21 products. I'm just curious if you could expand on that too.
Yeah, we power the blue checkmark verifications within Twitter. And it's really interesting. So previously, if you wanted a blue checkmark verification, you would have to reach out to Twitter personally, and it would be a very long process. And so they did not, because of that, the operational burden would be so significant that they did not enable anybody to be able to apply for a blue check mark verification. And what Unit 21 did was really provide the automation around the workflows so that a company like Twitter could easily create workflows of how they want identity to be verified, and then determine whether the particular user should get a blue check mark verification or not. And this is not Twitter to basically say that, okay, if you are interested and you meet a certain set of criteria, you can apply online, which they previously couldn't, and you'd have to really find a way to get into Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very cool. I mean, in a nutshell, the concept of building blocks that don't require you to know how to code are disrupting every industry. And so not only, it's great to see, I'm sure a lot of the low-code, no-code tools right now, especially at this conference, are web development based. And it's cool to see something in a totally different realm on the financial technology side, leveraging the same concepts to enable people that don't know how to code to do the same things that computer scientists do day in and day out. So that's pretty awesome. I think you wanted to ask me a few questions. So I know we're a little bit past half time, so I want to give you the opportunity to ask me some stuff too.
Yeah, definitely. We'd love to turn the tables around. So Darian, in your opinion, there's a lot of hype with this whole low-code, no-code revolution. Is it living up to its hype?
I think so, yes. I mean, we now have many multi-billion-dollar companies that are in this ecosystem, right? Webflow is a perfect example. Another one that comes to mind is Figma, which has allowed people to really build screen design and at scale, and soon it'll generate code, if I had to guess. We're also seeing things like Auth0 and MemberStack, Flowdash, so many workflow automation companies. There's now Bubble. There's Flutterflow, which we funded as well, which allows you to build a mobile app on native devices without knowing how to code. I think to Mark Andreessen's quote of software is eating the world, I think it's really low code, no code more than anything else. So very exciting to see how the world is changing. I think to me, it's quite interesting because not everyone is going to learn how to code. Obviously, that would be great. But at the same time, I think there's so many things and so many jobs that low code, no code will enable people that don't know how to code to really be part of the knowledge economy, which is where the world is going. So I don't think it's just hype. I don't think it's just a trend. I think it really is the new way of building products and building things. And many people will be leveraging low code, no code tools going forward.
Yeah, I agree. I read recently somewhere that if I'm not misremembering, around 90% of people don't know how to code at all. And that's really what the no-code movement is enabling, which is the part of what you said, software leading the world.
Yeah, I mean, 90% of the world population not knowing how to code, that's a big TAM. So I'm very bullish on low-code, no-code from an investor perspective.
As an investor, are you particularly interested in no-code, low-code products? Or do you think it depends on the vertical? Do you think it could be in every vertical?
I think it definitely can be in almost every vertical. I do think that there are certain industries that are more difficult than others from a low-code, no-code perspective. I think that when you have a common task or a set of common tasks that are applied to a large data set, there is obviously some that necessitates a low-code, no-code tool, but there are going to be some verticals that won't necessarily need it. However, I think that we're starting to see that the toolkits are more. Your toolkit, I think, is within KYC AML. Most of the toolkits are very horizontal in low code, no code. And so we're going to see what emerges from that. And then we'll have verticalized tools that are more specialized. So people will maybe use a low code, no code tool for the basics, then realize they need something more complex. And we may have many billion-dollar companies built in each of these verticals. I think KYC AML is one of the first ones we're seeing. I think you're on your way to building a massive business and already have a whole ton of incredible customers. And so you're probably the example of started with horizontal approach and now moving vertical. That's kind of where I think this will go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting, certainly, where the base is going to be horizontal. And then for each use case, there'll be a different focus on that. So you mentioned a few no-code, low-code software companies in your portfolio. Can you talk more about that? What are other examples?
Yeah, so I think the ones that are the most interesting today are native mobile app development. There are companies, like I mentioned, Flutterflow, which is doing quite well, that allows you to drag and drop components and build your own mobile application, and then deploy it to the iOS and Android stores within minutes. There's also, and that they allow you to build pretty much anything. They were showcased at Google I/O and basically allowed you to build allowed an art museum to build a fully fledged application for both device types within a few hours. And that is a brand new use case that used to require hiring a team of engineers to build that application. And and anytime you wanted to update it, you would have to rehire that firm or a new firm to change the code. Now you can sort of drag and drop and make revisions. You can work on it as a team, and it's all visual. There's actually no coding required, which is quite nice. We're also seeing things like Stacker, which is a very interesting company that raised around from Andreessen, I believe, and they're allowing people to build internal tools for let's say order management or process management, and they're just growing like a weed because most of the internal tooling use cases before companies like Stacker or Retool, which is another company, emerged, most of the time you had to hire a team of engineers to build and maintain the code. Now what you can do is sort of drag and drop different building blocks and use cases and change those over time. And with sort of the emergence of these different drag and drop tools, and as those engineers at those companies build more drag and drop capabilities, people within internal companies are able to build what they need without really needing to hire any engineers outside. So it's sort of like a scale problem in the sense that there are these companies that are building generic building blocks for these individual use cases. And we're seeing it across the board. Some of the other companies that come to mind are Internal, which is a Retool competitor. There's also other companies that we've seen that are allowing for these drag and drop capabilities and building on top of internal tools that don't necessarily need to host data. They're maybe taking advantage of your internal data sets, connecting to your database and giving you the UI layer on top to make the changes that you need. And then the last one is more and more companies that I see are moving to Webflow for their marketing sites, is that they find it very easy to drag and drop. They can, within the marketing team, do all of the creative work that they need to without necessarily having a programmer or a developer in-house or hired externally. So yes, I think it's eating every aspect of people's work.
Yeah, we are a user of Webflow as well. And it's really fantastic, the ability to continuously modify on the fly and what that enables for a company that may not have that many marketing resources. Okay, great. What do you think will come next in this entire low-code, no-code movement?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that the next step is really going to be, can people do more complex work in low code, no code? Are they able to implement animations that work everywhere? Can they do three-dimensional design anywhere? One company we funded is Spline, and Spline allows you to do animations in 3D design and embed that on any device. Obviously, making sure that works on any device is very difficult, but we're starting to see that because of the way where the web is going, more and more developers and more people are not necessary when you want to do things that are complex, like a 3D animation or a visual environment, or even some form of gameplay or similar to gameplay inside of these applications. Right now, it's very two-dimensional, business applications, but I think that people are going to be able to drag and drop and build their own games and build their own animations and rich experiences with low code, no code, which to me is very interesting. I would much rather be in an environment where people don't necessarily have to code, because not everyone will want to, but they can still be creative. And that's something that I think low code, no code is going to enable going forward.
That is really interesting. I was going to ask you a question about competition. So you mentioned so many different types of companies, and how do you think competition in this space will evolve from an investor standpoint? And of course, when you talk about the creativity, I think that will really help companies differentiate amongst each other.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think about this a lot, because we obviously have to place bets on good companies. And if there's a lot of competition in a space, that's obviously means you need to raise more money. And sometimes there's a winner take all per company in the market. I think that we are entering a period of time where technology is going to be used by everybody, and these low code, no code tools are going to be used by everybody. I believe that humans are naturally creative. They're naturally wanting to build things. And what COVID did, on the flip side, is that it sort of expanded the TAM dramatically. Is that if you were working out in the real world and COVID hit, you actually started to say, maybe I should look for things that I can do working online or working with, that I don't have to interact with people. People were locked up for 2 years, and so they had to start to embrace technologies. And I think that's what we're seeing globally, is the explosion of usage of tools and online work. And I think that has expanded the market size for these low code, no code tools dramatically. So dramatically that I think that in a given vertical, there can be multiple billion-dollar companies. I think a lot of people have said, oh, the market is overbought. There's so many companies raising money, et cetera. I actually am taking the optimistic view. I think the optimistic view really is that we are transitioning as a world to a more knowledge-based economy, to a more digital economy. And so there are going to be many, many tools that people will need in order to do their jobs. And so it'll almost be, the market size is so large that if you wanted to pick Unit 21 or any of your competitors, you may not care because the market is so big and you can each build multi-billion-dollar companies. Same with Retool or Internal or others, is that we sort of look at software, or at least I look at software as this greenfield opportunity now, because billions of people that maybe use technology on the side are now using technology primarily to make a living. And that's really what I'm optimistic about going forward.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we saw that with our company. When the pandemic hit, we were 10 people. Today we're 80 people. The company's exploded. Our revenue has 7x since the pandemic started. And the main, or actually 10x since the pandemic started. But the main reason really is that that there is more happening online. There's more fintech companies starting. There are more people trying to do digital payments or digital banking. And because of that, there's just, the TAM is ever expanding, which is really, like you said, is really the optimistic viewpoint, instead of saying that, okay, there is this one company and that's the competitive landscape.
Right, exactly. I mean, it remains to be seen. I mean, that's my bet, and I'm glad you agree. And we're seeing this trend across all of our companies. But I'm quite optimistic about low code, no code. I mean, we are now in an era where anyone with a phone or a laptop can build a company, can build a product, can anyone that is for your business, anyone that's in anti-fraud can now build what they have in their minds around how to automate anti-fraud and know your customer. They can do that without having to code. And I think that's a noble mission for all these low code, no code companies. So I'm very optimistic about the future. Well, anyway, I think we're down to our last minute or so. Is there anything else you'd like to leave the audience with, Trisha? Really appreciate this time, and I hope that I answered your questions. You did a fantastic job, and it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been great as always to talk to you. And really, the only thing I'd like to leave the audience with, that it's a really exciting time. It's just starting, and we're really at the brink of what is going to be a fantastic revolution to enable non-technical people to do things that have been historically gated by engineers.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to seeing your continued success.
Thank you, Darren.